Thank you so much. And thanks everyone for coming here, coming up the tiny stairs and the small elevator. I was told I should not stand in front of here because then you cannot see the slides. I'm really, really happy to be here because, to be very honest with you, if I go back 10 years, I never thought that I would end up in design. I also never would have thought that I end up in service design. What I was doing 10 years ago was I had just fallen in love. That person happened to study in New York, so I went to New York, no visa, nothing, and I got super lucky, ended up working for a gallery that was doing performance or hosting performance artists. And I was doing the communication for the gallery because I had studied systemic communication science, and my biggest dream was going into advertising or something to be a tiny bit creative. But who you see here is one of the artists at that gallery. This is David Horvitz, exchanging breath with a plant. So my CO2 for your oxygen. And I would be lying if I fully got what he was doing back then. It's 10 years ago. No climate futures. Climate change was an issue back then, but I was just way more interested in the other art, to be honest. But looking back now, this was a pivotal moment for me. Not only what I do today, but also how this time at the gallery got me into design. And I want to tell you a bit the journey that I went through to where I am today now, where I try to really push planetary perspectives in education, in organizations, and also in our daily lives. So, before we get started, I also want to appreciate that you all made it to become service designers at some point. I'm pretty sure most of you don't have kind of the straight CV because for a long time there haven't been programs to study this or do this. So in order to celebrate this moment, please turn around, grab a neighbor in front of you or behind you and give them a good old high five that you made it to be a service designer. You did it, yeah. The other good news is we actually have a bit more time today. We have 2 slots for the planet, so I'm very happy for that. And I'm doing one thing that I never do. I have an agenda. I have an agenda in my mind usually, but I never share it. But as we're spending more or less an hour together, I want to just tell you a bit what we're going to do, even though it's quite generic. I'm going to tell you, or I just told you how I got into it, or I'm going to tell a bit more, then how we do it, how to overcome some blind spots that we have in service design. Then we're going to go a bit into theory, how we can think about it, how we should do it, how we get organizations to do it, and in the end, I'm happy to take some questions. Also, as we are a small group and we have time, if there's one question you really have to get off your chest, just raise your hand. I'll try to spot you, and you can ask it right away. So keep it quite simple. So how we do it? After my time in the thrilling art scene, I didn't become an artist, unfortunately, but I ended up in design, more or less with some stints in between in digital product design. So I used to live in Berlin for 7 years, working for a design studio between Berlin and Tokyo, building applications, building platforms, building systems. When I started, we only built apps, so I got the chance to kind of start the research practice, the strategic design practice, as we called it, all the way to venture design, and lastly, planet-centric design. But back to the roots. So what we were doing there is we were building these little things, not the smartphones, but these little colorful things that live on the smartphones. And it was hugely successful. Many of us really could thrive, could build our careers on creating amazing applications or products for humans. And we got so good at that if you look at this picture, almost everyone is staring into their phones. See that? There's one guy here. I always think he's reading the newspaper, but if you really look closely, he's just having the smartphone behind the book. So, And this just shows how good we have become at creating value for users. We really know how to trigger those dopamine points. We really know what you're looking for. We might even create behaviors or needs that you didn't have before, but then once you have it, it feels good, right? But as I know, not all of you are digital designers. This applies to kind of physical services as well, or physical user journeys. So IKEA is one of my favorite examples. not the store layout. I think that would be a full talk in itself as well, because you always buy napkins and candles you don't need. What I'm focusing on is that very moment when you're at the cashier. You have these huge things, in cardboard boxes. You have to put them on the belt somehow, or you scan them, and it's really annoying. And then IKEA always is much more expensive than you expected it to be in the end. In user journey terms, you're like really down, right? But what does the IKEA do? At the very end, they give you a very cheap hot dog. And that's all people think about. Yeah, we got that cheap hot dog for €1. Maybe now with inflation, 150. But that's service design also to me, to really know how you organize that to kind of create the value for these customers even in their toughest moments at the cashier. That there's downsides to this. IKEA is also the biggest hot dog restaurant in the world, with a lot of meat going through, of hot dogs that people didn't really want to buy but bought anyway. That's another topic, but we get to this. What I'm talking about is human-centered design, right? So really creating value for users. And this is very important. I'm not against creating value for users, because we see what happens when we don't do that. Maybe some of you know this video. We know our customers. We built a very fancy design slide. And wait, my favorite is coming. Or is he? Oh, no, yeah, there. That's my favorite. So it actually makes sense to ask humans, users, customers, hey, what do you really need? And to be fair, a lot of organizations haven't done that for a long time and are still not doing that. Quick stop here. Also, hi to the hybrid people, or the ones that are in the digital space. I'll try to include you a bit as well later on. But let's move on. So what we have here is traditional organizations that were really good with working on the business side. So either they knew we can make a lot of money, so let's just provide that. Or they came from a technological standpoint. We have a blockchain now, so let's just do something with blockchain, but really not figuring out this part maybe and this part. So adding the human circle is very important. And I think a lot of you know this diagram, especially when you work in service design, you really try to incorporate all three levels, and kind of the sweet spot is here in the middle. But speaking of service design, I realized that I hadn't looked into a definition of service design for a very long time. We just do it, kind of know what it is. But I don't want to bore you with a lot of definitions for too long, but sometimes it's quite interesting to see what people actually write about it. So I found one by Nielsen Norman Group, very famous design company by Don Norman and his fellows. What struck me here instantly was that actually they first prioritized the employees and then the customers. It kind of makes sense. I kind of like it because it's edgy, and it shows a bit that, a very clear difference maybe towards interaction designers and so on. But it made me think a bit, are we really just doing this for employees and customers? So I looked a bit further. I think the running joke with service design is it shouldn't really be defined. There's so many definitions. I don't remember which book it was. I think this is Service Design Thinking, where the author says, there's so many, I'm just going to list 20 of them. I'm doing the same here, by the way. Not 20, but 3. But what's nice to see is a bit what connects them and how do they work. And I'm always very interested in who are we designing for? Who are we creating value for? So we see here again, it's for the service user and the service provider. So that fits quite well. Also offers this holistic view, which is what I said when we go for all the 3 circles. But after all, it's human-centered. That's our good old service design network, by the way, that calls it this way. Stefan Moritz, he is one of the first academics that wrote about service design. He says we innovate and improve things, but also for clients and organizations. So the same view, who we are designing for. And the last definition is by Birgit Mager. Some people I heard refer to her as the godmother of service design. So I really like her top part, because she talks about complex systems for relevant stakeholders. And that sparked something in me, right? Who are the relevant stakeholders? And she knows that this is a bit of an abstract definition, right? So when she explained it, she went again with a user perspective and provider perspective. But I think there's something there, and I know there's something there, because across my work and also my research, I came across this quote from the European Commission. And this is quite brutal. So 80% of the emissions are already kind of set in stone during the design phase. And this is not just the materials you use or the things you have in the product or how you produce it. A lot of this happens in the use phase, that we also have some way or kind of an agency over to design that. So yeah, let that sink in. So there really is. I just also watched a talk on humility. I'm not saying we can solve this or we're the ones who can do all of this, but I do believe we have a responsibility in here. Yeah. So to me, today, kind of how I see design, and I see this a bit broader, not just service design alone, but my really easiest definition I have for design is it changes or it shapes behaviors. Because if a chair kind of shapes your behavior, how you sit on it and how long and how maybe your back is in the future, so it shapes these things. Beautiful things can shape your behavior, how you behave in a room, how long you stay, and so on. The size of your water cooker shapes how much water you put in there and boil it, even though you only need 1 cup, right? The shape of the dialogue when you print something, if it's like a really smart thing to do is to have the duplex printing, for back and front side as a default, because it instantly cuts paper usage almost by half in large organizations. Now think of IBM or any other big organization. It's massive. It's a tiny design change that changes so much about the behavior. But yeah, here, already hinted a bit to it. I think what we have to start doing is to shape behaviors for the better. So yeah, how do we overcome these blind spots that we have in human-centered design? Because there's an issue in it, and I will tell you a bit about it. It's not new, by the way. This is a book from, I think, the 70s by Victor Papanek. He was quite a controversial designer, but he said that designers are one of the most harmful professions. And I'm not letting you off the hook. I know you're not industrial designers, but this is the 70s. Service design was not invented back then. So if he would be alive today, he would maybe not say service designers, but designers as a whole. And you see, advertising is the worst. So I'm glad I didn't end up in advertising, but in design. No, what am I trying to say here? There is a responsibility, and he talks a bit more about that. But in order to understand that responsibility, we also need to know what are we aiming for. And there's this really important question: what does sustainability mean to you? And there's no easy answer. So I will need your help. I will need the help of the people in the cloud. I'm just going to call you that way. There's a Miro board, I'm told. So if you can just write down what comes to mind when you hear sustainability, please do that for you in the room. Grab the person you just high-fived a few minutes ago and briefly talk or exchange what does sustainability mean to you. Yeah? I'm going to give it like 1 or 2 minutes. All right, everyone. I wasn't expecting so much of a discussion, so let's try to. Okay, wrap up your statements and then come back to me. What have I started? Oh my God. All right, everyone, come back to me. I want to hear just very few statements. Can you wrap it up, please? Thank you so much. So, I just want to hear one or two statements. Make them short. One sentence. I know this is brutal, but one sentence on what sustainability might be. There's a huge group here that had a big discussion. What is sustainability to you?
We said sustainability means being able to survive, to not lose its essence and to continue over time.
Okay. Sustainability means to be able to survive in the end, like very short end.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Very much. Maybe on the left side. Now nobody's looking at me. There. Yeah, you just looked at me. What was sustainable?
So that the virtual people.
Yeah.
It's about designing behaviors.
Yeah. That's very smart. I don't need this. Yeah, I mean, it's the same with definitions of service design with sustainability. It depends who you ask and how you define it, but it makes sense to think about it. And one thing that really has grown with me is to say, like, we shouldn't talk about sustainability. We should talk about regeneration. So here's a beautiful graph for you. What does this mean? Maybe you see sustainable is here, right? How our organizations, our economies work is that they're conventional economies. We extract resources, we extract the energy of our employees in order to turn it into something else, and kind of convert that into shareholder value, if I say this a bit critical. But we exploit, we take it out of the earth, we take it from the fields, and so on. And it's degenerating our planet and ecosystem. Next step is green performance. This might make some people a bit angry, but it's just relatively better than others. It's a step, right? I will say this again, but sustainability should not be an exclusive club. I value all the steps that are taken, but I just need organizations here to understand it's not enough. They have to go further. Then we have sustainability. That's the famous net zero that everybody talks about by 2030, and then they suddenly go like, no, maybe 2050. Sustainable actually means just like we're not making it worse. We're sustaining how it is right now. And unfortunately, I believe we have kind of passed that point where sustaining in itself is enough. So we have to move further. We have to start to restore. We killed so much biodiversity all across our planet that it's really starting to make us suffer also as humans. And what regenerating then really means is you almost increase the diversity, the biodiversity, you increase the value. And to make this a bit more tangible, I came across this concept the first time when I was working for BioVision. It's in the agricultural sector, so they were working a lot of sub-Saharan Africa, trying to do or to promote, it was called agroecology, very similar to regenerative agriculture. And the idea there is, let's say if conventional agriculture uses a shitload of fertilizer and kind of transformed crops to get the highest yields, then sustainable agriculture would maybe use normal crops and, let's say, organic fertilizers to do this, but it still would work quite like we are used to agriculture, the big fields and so on. And what they were trying to do is really having mixed fields. So instead of pesticides and fertilizers, they would plant different plants with each other. So the soil wouldn't kind of get less and less, but be enriched over time. So it's very knowledge intensive, and it doesn't yield or doesn't kind of produce huge yields from the beginning, but over time it grows. And the communities that adopted agroecology and regenerative agriculture now really thrive because they have the best soil in the area, and the best fruit and vegetables. So this is about regeneration. I'm going to stop it here. There's much, much more to explore, but my main takeaway for this slide for you is just like sustainability contains what we have, regeneration enriches what we have in a meaningful manner. So if we go back to this diagram, what are we doing here? We're also enriching the experiences, right? So we're enriching value for humans. We're making them so happy, it's so convenient, you get everything that you need, exactly also the things you didn't really think about. Or we maximize the value for business, so we make it profitable, we have a great ROI. Or we really maximize the technology, how it's used, how far we can push it. And I do like this diagram. It's important, but there's one fatal flaw in this diagram, and it is that these circles, they're not in a vacuum, or they're not isolated. They're actually part of a bigger system, which is the planet. And unfortunately, this planet has boundaries. It's very simple. And when I talk of the planet, there's again and again people saying like, well, we don't have to save the planet, it will survive anyway. It's true, right? But I don't see the planet as just a piece of dead rock in space. I see the planet as the resources we have, the forests, the sand, everything, the ecosystems that thrive. Ecosystem for me can also be an agricultural ecosystem or a city like Berlin. It's things you have to care for. The communities, the neighborhoods. That is the planet. So it's the ecological and the societal parts that go together. And I base this a lot on the work by Kate Raworth. Thank God, finally, an economist like that came around, right? Moving away from the old way of how we see economy. And she has the donut economics model. And what she says, we have the ecological ceiling that we shouldn't overshoot, but we also have a social foundation that we should make sure to provide. Simple things like an apartment or health. So we should design for this rim here to stay on that. And yeah, how is it going? Yeah, it doesn't even fit the slide. So that's very recent. I think it came out in September from the Stockholm Center for Resilience Center. We now overshoot 6 out of 9 boundaries by far. And this is on a global level. So it's not good. Also, if you break it down a bit further, so this now is with the donut model. It's a bit different dimensions, but you get the point. It's red for Germany. But you see also the ecological ceiling, so we're doing pretty good in Germany as well, but land use change is not so working well. But India here, you see, is currently not overshooting, which is what I thought. But it got me a bit suspicious, because I was like, I mean, don't get this wrong if there are any Indians watching, but this is amazing if this would be true. So I was actually hoping that it's true. But then I found the newer data, and it's also much better than Germany, so kudos to that. But we're having issues with phosphorus, so mostly from fertilizer and agriculture. So yeah, and you know why this happens? Because we keep optimizing for humans, for our businesses, for just for ourselves and not for the planet. We're in the middle, and we need to decenter us as humans to a certain extent and move to a thing that I call planet-centric design. Others call it life-centered design, environment-centered design. This graphic was once discussed on the French side of LinkedIn. There they called it humanity-centered design. So in the end, I don't care how you call it, but what's important is that we decentered the human. So we're still here, don't worry. We're part of this planet, but we're not at the center of it anymore. And yeah, here we are with my good friend, David Horvitz. Well, good friend is a bit of an overstatement. We haven't spoken for a long time, just until very recently. But what he was doing is these trees, he collected them from the seeds in Zuccotti Park. Zuccotti Park, maybe some of you remember Occupy Wall Street 10 years back. So we are the 1%. No, not the 1%, the 99%. So it was a kind of a critical movement that said we need to kind of lessen the inequalities we have. So he collected these seeds. The parents, as he called them, of these little trees witnessed the struggle, the hopes, the fear, the clashes, and he germinated them, let them grow. He had them interact with people, exchange breaths. He took them to lectures. He took them to concerts. So he was treating them almost like stakeholders of that city as New Yorkers. Each of this tree was treated as a full New Yorker. They were part of that. And looking back at this now, I understand. What he was doing was really understanding, hey, they're part of that ecosystem that we call New York City. They're part of what makes our planet, and we should treat them accordingly. So what he did, which I took a lot more years to understand, is he kind of had this planetary perspective that goes away from the egoism that we have as humans, sometimes also as designers, and broadens that to the ecosystems level. Yeah, so that is kind of why this matters. Now, this is a special edition here because we have a bit more time. I have prepared some theory and philosophy behind this viewpoint. But I know it's the second day of the conference. I also know Berlin has a lot of great bars, especially on Thursday evening. So I want to actually give it up to you. If you want to dive into some theory, I'll make it very quick. There's a bit more text on it, so you can take a picture and read it later. Or if we go straight into examples, methods, and so on. So if you say like, hey, Sam, you've talked enough already. I'm a practitioner, I'm a designer. Let's go into the examples. Hands up. Okay. If you say like, well, I'm such a practitioner, I work so much all the time, sometimes it's nice to reflect a bit, hands up. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'll try to do this in the easy way, but I'm very happy. There's this quote, I really like this one. I butchered it a bit from German, but it basically said, because we're always so obsessed with the newest of all things and not the best of all times, that's why we kind of end up in our own. Mire is a fancy word for dirt, right? So it's just so much noise all the time. It's not getting better. Yeah, so let's go into what is there. I'd like to start with Latour. Bruno Latour recently died, but what he did is he came up with this, and many others, with this idea of actor network theory, of human actors and non-human actors that are in interrelations with each other. You see a picture here of the Parliament of Things. What can things decide? And yeah, how does that work? My key takeaway here really is that we have non-human actors and they have agency. So agency means they have a certain power or saying in how we go about the world. A simple thing as a chair is telling you exactly how you have to sit. You can hack it a bit and sit in a really weird way, but after all, it has some agency over how this works. Well, let's move on. Cyborgs. It's not a new book. It's also, I think, from the 80s by Donna Haraway. I think initially it was more of a feminist critique or a point where she said these, what is it called? Not dualism, but dichotomies between male and female. They're actually not so, they don't really apply, also not human and nature. It's also no longer applying, also not the social and the material. So she had this case that we have to overcome the dichotomy and see things as kind of modular, as cyborgs. They can be many things at the same time. And also for us, this is important. When we really think about the planetary perspective that we have, we are also part of our surroundings. They are embedded in us. So it's not sensical to always differentiate so clearly between the social, the material, or the natural. We are one health, so it goes together. And it's a really nice essay, a bit tough to read, but I can recommend it. Yeah, this one's a lot tougher to read, so here I struggled. But Karen Barrett is amazing in my opinion, but also very complex. What Karen said is that everything is intertwined. So you can imagine me during my PhD studies holding, it was a water glass in my hand, thinking about, okay, where does the social end and the material begin? Because in her view, it's all intertwined. And maybe this is a bit abstract with the bottle, but we are already completely intertwined with the material. Let's think about all the algorithms that we have in the world, for example. So many of you who have been maybe for the first time in Berlin, you rely heavily on Google Maps. Google Maps has a direct effect on how you see the city, how you perceive it. A schnitzel that is rated 5 stars will taste better than a schnitzel that's rated 3 stars. That's just how these things work. So it's really getting more and more intertwined, and we cannot separate it anymore. And this is accelerating. So understanding this and really thinking about, okay, how do we then still separate? What kind of powers are at play to do that is very, very important when we also talk of planetary perspectives. I can recommend this book, but as I said, I struggled. There's one that is a lot more practical. It's called Social Material Design by, I have to read this, Bjorn and Osterlund, which is quite applied. So if you're interested, have a look. Now when everything is together, nothing is separable again anymore, and yeah, it's just a huge mess. What can we do? We can ask Donella Meadows what to do. She wrote some really nice essays. One was Dancing with Systems, the other one is about leverage points. And she said, hey, if this is the system that we have to change, there are leverage points in the system. There are some that don't really work so much. We can change constants and parameters, for example, but not such a good leverage point. But there is, for example, here with feedback loops. You know, if I do this, then the other thing happens. Such a much better leverage point. Or you go all the way here, and you start thinking of the mindset or the system goals. What are we trying to achieve? What is the intent? So systems thinking really helps you to understand, okay, we cannot change the whole system. We have to focus on leverage points. Also really important for planetary perspectives. And yeah, let's not forget all the things that are not written down in books, right? There's a lot of knowledge across the globe, sometimes only transferred to each other by voice or in oral ways, but it is important. There are peoples who have lived in certain areas for a long time. They know how this works. They know the interplay. And I think it should be a quest, all of us, to try to unearth this. It's hard because it's not written, it's not searchable sometimes, but really doing the effort, or at least having the awareness that it's there, is already a start. And that already was the short excursus. Was okay? You still with me? Yeah? Good. I need a quick water break. All right, so how should we do it? Thankfully, we have a plan. The most important thing is to realize, hey, we are entering the age of the sustainability transformation. We've all experienced also the digital transformation, for example, which also was quite brutal. I mean, if you imagine what happened to the music industry, to all these, to journalism as well, that was crazy. Also to a lot of companies that could be very chill in their location, wherever they were. They didn't have to innovate much because there was just not this global competition. I believe it will really help us to think of what is coming, also in the same ideas of this disruption or transformation that is happening. And the good thing is we had now like a trial run with the digital transformation, and now we can get the real one with the sustainability transformation. Because all of you, I'm sure, are transforming your organizations one way or the other. So I have to be true to the quote, right, that I just put. I'm not trying to reinvent everything. I'm trying to recalibrate the tools we used to cope with the sustainability, with the digital transformation, to also work with the sustainability transformation and add more. And why this matters is, I mean, we always had these transformations. We started out with the Industrial Revolution. That one, we had kind of a toolbox, which is called Taylorism, so making things more efficient and really mass production. We had kind of, I call this a business transformation. This one's a bit vague, but mostly, maybe you've heard of Toyotanomics, or the Toyota system, where suddenly Europe got really scared because Toyota was so good at building cars and everyone wanted to do the same. So this is business process engineering that really helped here, and modern management methodologies. Digital, I talked about. I believe in a digital transformation, when everybody was like, oh my God, what is happening? Everything's changing. It was so helpful to say, like, don't worry, focus on the user. You know, it's very refreshing and simple if you have this clarity. But now we are entering this sustainability transformation where you have to look with the planet, and we need another way to work with that. So what I have come up with over the years is I like to kind of dissect this transformation into 4 movements. It's very important that these are movements. It's not a drastic change. We are moving, we are evolving, we are getting there. From human to planet, from quantity to quality, short to long term, market to planet fit. We're going to dive into each of these. I'll give you some examples of where I see this is already applied, and I'm also giving you some methods to use it, and a question to use at home. So if you're ready, let's start. First one, from human to planet. Maybe you've realized that a lot of your methods you use, user personas, user journeys, user research, are fully focused on users. There's like no room for other stakeholders. And it's not because we don't want that, it's just there by design, and that's what makes it dangerous. So what we need to do is we need to open up these methodologies. One thing is to work with personas like that. So there's an artist called Sharon van der Most. He wrote letters from non-human actors, and he sent them to important people all over the world. So he, for example, sent one to, I think it was Donald Trump back then, from a melting ice cap. There's one thing I want to try with you. We can try to do that as well. So I was thinking, because the River Spree is right there, so we write a quick letter from the River Spree to the organizers of the service design conference. Should we try? It's going to be a bit hard, because I only have it on the small thing down there, but let's see if I can get it to work. So I have trusty ChatGPT here, and I'm just going to ask it to write a letter to the conference. Write a letter to the organizers of the service design conference in Berlin. Start the letter with the sentence, colon. I might just be the River Spree running outside your conference venue, but here are a few things I want to let you know. Did it work? I don't really see it. Yeah? Okay, so let's... What did they call it? The spray? Oh, the spray. Yeah, well. Yeah, for the ones who cannot read it, because it's too small, I'm going to play parts of it quickly, if that works.
Subject, a gentle stream of suggestions for your esteemed conference. Dear esteemed organizers of the Service Design Conference in Berlin, I might just be the River Spree running outside your conference venue, but here are a few things I want to let you know. Inspirational speakers, inviting pioneers in service design will not only grace the event with invaluable insights, but will also elevate the learning experience for all attendees. Interactive workshops. Hands-on workshops allow attendees to dive deep into the practical aspects of service design, fostering a collaborative learning environment.
Yeah, I'm going to stop it here. It's going to take too long. But what I wanted to show, I mean, I never know what comes out here. Sometimes it's very sustainability conscious, so it really tells it, hey, please watch out for me. I'm a river. Here, it's very practical. So it's like a designer river this time. Giving good ideas. Why am I showing this? It's quite an interesting way to also have personas like that, right? I'm not going to do this now, but you can ask, hey, can you build a persona? What are your jobs to be done? Gains and pains, and it gives you an overview. Now, huge disclaimer: these models are trained on human output only, so this does not make true research obsolete. But what it does is it gives you a way to interact with things. And I've used this a couple of times in workshops already, also with sea levels. And when you suddenly have sea levels interact with the one natural asset that their company pollutes the most, it's really fun. Yeah. So, let me find my mouse again, and we move on. Yeah, really taking this serious. There's a company, Faith in Nature. They have the planet or nature as a director. So they work with lawyers, to find it's quite a complex guardianship model to have them decide what is happening to a certain extent. So this also really, really interesting. Why are they not part of every board? Another concept is by a friend of mine. It's called Trees AI. So while most of us like trees, for city planners, they're annoying because they are costly. You have to groom them. They need water. They die. They need kind of a tree doctor. You need to, every fall you have a huge mess with the leaves. They take away expensive space. All these things. And what they did was they built a platform that also showed the upsides of a tree, how it prevents flooding, how it cleans the air, how it provides shade and cooling in summer. So making these things visible is so important because as of now, a tree is a cost factor for most cities. So these are a few examples. What I have here is a planetary stakeholder map. So of course you can do non-human personas or planetary personas as I call them, but you can also work with stakeholder maps and really add the planetary dimension to it. And yeah, people in the cloud, I don't know if anyone is there. I'm just going to try. I put this on the Miro, so feel free to start filling it out. So we have the conference here in the middle. And then maybe start with the River Spray as one important stakeholder and start putting this together. Yeah. This will fail horribly maybe because nobody is online, but we'll see. Yeah, you have until I'm through all the movements. Okay, so yeah, really what is the question that we have in this movement? It's which planetary stakeholders do we have and how can we make them visible? Because currently most of them are invisible. Okay, let's go to the next one, from quantity to quality. We have this idea that growth is always like my team is getting bigger, I'm getting richer, I get more money. The issue is a bit that, I mean, compare it to the famous analogy with the cake, right? So we think the cake is getting bigger all the time, which is not the case. We talked about that the planet has limits. So if all cakes get bigger on this planet, we have a problem. What we can do, however, is we can make the cake tastier. That's a valid option. We don't need more cake, we need better cake. And this is something that really applies to the interactions or the services we design as well. Really beautiful example is from Tokyo, Japan. It's a bookstore with only one book. So why have thousands of books if you can have or offer an amazing experience with one book? I know this will not work for every bookstore, but I really like the idea. Why not? Think about your organization, how that will work. Another thing is we have to also stop only relying on the things we can measure, right? We have an obsession with carbon emissions. Jan called this the carbon tunnel vision. There's so much next to it. I think it's good that we measure it because that is something that is easily understandable. But next to it, we should really put in the work to also measure more qualitative things, which by definition are hard to measure, right? But we have to do the work. One way to work with these relationships, I mean, this is not on the metrics, but we just saw a talk on journey mapping and so on. And what I like to do is kind of a recalibrated, what is it? Not business model canvas. I forgot the name. The one with the front and the backstage. Service blueprint. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Quite often we only watch for the organizational part, right? When our organization is in part with that, where we have a true backstage and the front stage. So the first recalibration we can do, we add a before and an after, a supply and a usage. With service design, I think here we're kind of good in the usage part, but also think about the end. I've seen recently a beautiful talk about engineering, right? When you think more in circular terms, it's not only the purchase that is important, but also how you end things. So that is in there. The other thing we do is, I mean, this is basic with the steps. I like to work with jobs to be done. But what I don't do anymore is the happiness of the customer. I know it's an essential part of the journey map, and everybody loves that part because you can use funny emojis. I'm going to do planetary impact now for every step. And it's amazing. If you do that in your project, I mean, I dare you. Just add this line next time, and you will be surprised how many things come up here. Then the opportunities, that is a bit more like open, what if we change this and that. And then quite often what I like to do is the SDG targets. So this doesn't stand for Service Design Global Conference, but for Sustainable Development Goals. Yeah, I'm not going to go much into the SDGs, but they're a big framework by the UN. And a lot of companies rely their whole strategies on that. And design works a lot better if you can show that connect, how it really connects. So this is your way of showing it and integrating it. Question? Yeah. What if you don't add new relationships for once, but really look at the ones you already have? We're moving on from short to long term. Yeah, here, this is really the realm of the big regulators, right? The governments, because they can do that. If they say that there's no combustion engine anymore, then it will hopefully happen in that way. So there's initiatives like the European Bauhaus. Another initiative that's more from the private side is the carbon coin by Delton Cheng, which is quite interesting. It's kind of a tokenized way. So how can I explain this in simple terms? It's like a gold standard or a standard that is backed by central banks. So if you either take out carbon or kind of make sure you don't emit it, you get that coin. And it's like a very good currency that then also lets you invest into the future. So a very interesting project. A project that we have been doing with going further is working on the future of European higher arts education. So we're currently doing a project with ELIA, the European League of the Institutes of the Arts, really thinking about what is the role of art in Europe, but also the world in the next 10 years. And kind of this battle cry from STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, to STEAM, adding the arts in there as a really essential practice to keep things together as well and make sense. And when we go to the methods, a method that I love, dearly love, is the vision cone, where you start now in the now, and here this is the uncertainty that gets bigger. But if you think of it in different terms, it's also the opportunities that get bigger to actually do significant change. So what you can do is, the first thing should be that you think about what are futures here. And other people do that, but the critical question is what are desirable futures, and even more critical is desirable for whom? So you can start mapping. Instead of always walking from here, we first map, hey, what is here, and then we kind of reverse engineer it, and know what do we have to do today to get there. So every design decision should kind of have this vision built in. Another question. And then we have, from market fit to planet fit. In its easiest way, this is just let's be true with the cost we generate. Maybe some of you were in Germany, came across this. Penny is a discounter. For 1 week only, they charged the true price of the products. So you see, normally it costs €3.19, but if they really calculate all the water pollution and everything, that would be €6. And you find these examples almost everywhere. Another way how you can do it, that's the company we just founded. We are trying to combine a non-profit association with a limited company. The association owns parts of that company so that we have a setup that allows us to really work in these new settings. So for example, my shares for the limited corporation, they cannot increase in value. Currently, I think it's a great idea. Ask me in 10 years. But I think it's very important to come or work against that growth imperative that organizations have, that it always has to be more valuable in that sense. We will create value, but not in the shares. Methodology that I find helpful is this book. It's also quite recent, Sustainable Business Model Patterns, Design, with a lot of patterns. And it kind of helps you to play around and find new models, because a lot of this goes together. All right. And here again, the value creation really is at the core of everything. So you have to understand. You have to understand what is value, what is creation in your organization, and how do we get it together. And if you figure that out, you're at the right points. So these are these 4 movements. And maybe you've realized a bit while we were going through this, it's very hard to pull this off alone. There are some methods you can use, but none of these movements or moves you can do alone. And this is why it's so important to think about how can we get organizations moving. Because one of the biggest differences for me between human-centered design and planet-centric design is this idea that human centricity really delegates a lot of the decision power to individuals. You have to be sustainable as a customer or as a user, or even as an employee. Whereas planetary perspectives emphasize this responsibility for organizations, and this is where the responsibility also is. Not in my single footprint. I'm not saying you should now all just shell out and fly everywhere, but it's really with organizations. And in order to get organizations to do this, we have to engage in sense-making with them. So you cannot just decide. We need to prepare the organizations. We need to massage the message, as they say. And how this works is with sense making. I love this recipe. How can I know what I think before I see what I say? Maybe that's close to your heart. There's a lot of designers. Sometimes you have to scribble. Sometimes you have to write something. Sometimes you have to say something to understand. And that's quite easy on the individual level. But on the collective level, this gets really tricky. How do we make sense collectively? And again, we have a secret thing that we do in design. We build prototypes, right? We make things tangible. Because this is material language. It's not German or English or anything. That's material language. So if I think it's an elderly home built by Franco Gehry, I can already get feedback on this from the kindergarten kid that walks past this building every day on the way to kindergarten, can give me feedback. An engineer can give me feedback on this. Maybe some elderly people can give me some feedback on this. So it really opens up the discussions on design much, much broader to more stakeholders. And what I also like here is this idea, and this is also inspired by architecture. So you see, I went down an architecture rabbit hole at one point, but there's this beautiful book called How Buildings Learn. Seeing buildings also as as layers that shift, some faster, some less fast. So furniture you can change quickly. The wall, I wanted to bang on the wall, but I don't have one. The wall is quite solid, so you can change that so fast. But what if we think of our prototypes as these things that have different layers? I don't care if it's high fidelity or low fidelity or digital or physical. What I care about is what is fixed and what is not fixed in this prototype. Because the fixed things, they help us to orient people. The non-fixed things help us to discuss and explore things. And this was the very core of the research that I did on strategizing as prototyping, really finding out, hey, what are prototypes, right? How do they really work? And to me, there are 4 dimensions that make a prototype or a thing into a prototype. The first one is inquiry. A prototype is not to sell something. It's not a sales thing. It's a generative inquiry. I create something to learn something, either through producing it or through showing it to you, and you're giving me feedback and resonance. Second one is oscillation. That's exactly what I meant with we need to have it sometimes crystallized, so very fixed, very clear, in order to orient. But then we also need to be able to liquefy it again, to know where we get it moving. Because if it's too fixed, it's outdated within a few weeks. But if we can keep it moving, it really turns into this prototype with agency. Temporality, third one. This means that we can present alternative futures or even alternative presents in the now. We can make them actionable, engageable. I can show it to you. You can work with me, even on the organizational level. And the last one is agency. We need to let our prototypes fly in that sense. So don't try to have power over them. Let them go wild sometimes and stir up things that you didn't account for, because that is really the essence of these prototypes. Maybe sometimes you had that in testing or when you showed something where things really went in another direction than you thought they would. This makes good prototypes. And having this will really help you with organizations, and I'm telling you how. This is the flow theory. Flow is this beautiful moment where you forget time, where everything just works and it all is nice. And you get into flow when or you don't get into flow when you have really good skill, but the challenge is too low. Then you're bored. If the challenge is very high, but you don't have the skill, then you're scared. And these are our organizations, right? So business as usual, everybody's a bit bored. They talk maybe sometimes about bullshit jobs even. So we're not doing this. When you really come with new business models, new regenerative business models, they get scared. They're like, oh, nothing will work anymore. So how do you get them in the flow? And the way to do this is to, work with prototyping. Use these shearing layers to kind of create clarity where there's anxiety that is based in the safe part, and use the more dynamic things to stir up the boring part, the business as usual, where it's open. And this will help you. I know this is a bit abstract, but we have to massage these organizations through that. We need to give clarity and openness at the same time. And I know how us humans love clearly defined boxes. I'm sorry, I cannot give you that. It's really about the oscillation and moving, because it's the only way how you can get your organization to go that way. So this brings me to my last point. As you've seen, we have a lot of stakeholders that we have to get into our design process. And this is, I didn't make this up. I have come across this attitude quite often in the past. Designers thinking like, yeah, the stakeholders are making everything more complex. But if we have this attitude, it will not work. We have to change this attitude to this. We actually have to invite more and more stakeholders, even the ones that don't want to talk, into these processes. And we can do that, and that's my very last slide, through these things. First, learning from the sustainability transformation, like really using what we've learned and making sure the urgency is clear to the organizations we work with. The second one is these planetary perspectives, so that we really include these stakeholders. Then break down this huge transformation into these 4 movements, because if you do it all together, it will not work. And lastly, prototype to get your organization or the organization you work with into flow. Yeah, and this was almost an hour of content. Thanks so much for staying with me. That's it. Thank you so much. If you have questions.